Hey everyone, and welcome to a video that probably won't get any views. It's time for Pug Theory. You know, like string theory? I'll keep working on the title. Anyway, this video is going to talk about the Land of the Lost. More specifically, if the 70s, 90s, and movies are connected. Like if they had a shared universe. Now, if you know what I'm talking about, you're probably thinking, hey, that kind of sounds a bit far-fetched. I mean, all of these are very different. And for the most part, you're right. But there is something all of them have in common, and that's time. And using the concept of time travel, I will tell you how all three of these are connected. Even though it seems very unlikely, just hear me out. To start this theory off, we're going to talk about the original, which is where everything began, both literally and in the theory. Now for this video, I'm mostly going to be focusing on stuff that is, part of the theory, because unfortunately the 70s and 90s show had a lot of filler because it's mostly about a family trying to survive in a pocket dimension. So this video is mostly going to be a theory video, not a lore video. So anyway, back to the theory. Anyway, the original series focused on a family that were going on a little canoe trip and ended up in a pocket dimension. They don't know how they got there, but eventually they will. Eventually, they meet Enoch the Altrusian. Now, the thing with Enoch is that when they first meet him, he assumes that the Sleestak, which are a green, taller version of an Altrusian, were his ancestors. You see, he assumed that he went back in time. The only problem is that Holly brought up that they found some ruins, and he soon finds out that he didn't go backward in time, he went forward. They aren't his ancestors. They're the descendants. Enoch understandably is a bit concerned about how his advanced society became the Sleestak. So he plans on going back in time and trying to fix whatever caused the Altrusians to devolve. Eventually the Marshals convinced him that the reason they might have, devolved is because Altrusians have trouble with their emotions, kind of like a Vulcan. And because of this, they basically convince him that in order to save his society, he needs to learn from the Marshals on how to, control their emotions. Because if he can't, then they'll become the Sleestak. Now, eventually they find out how they got to the Land of Lost. You see, Enoch was having trouble traveling back in time because there's some sort of paradox preventing him from going back in time. So he tried to look for what that paradox is, and you guessed it, it was the Marshals ending up in the Land of Lost. Because when he saw a flashback, kind of, it's more like he saw kind of a recording in the past of the Marshals going over the waterfall, but they don't end up in the Land of Lost. They were supposed to die that day. And this confused Enoch because how can they be dead there if they're alive here? And eventually he finds out that in order for them to leave the Land of Lost, they have to bring their past selves to the Land of Lost. Anyway, after the end of Season 2, the family gets to go home and Enoch gets to try and go back in time and fix the future. There's one problem though. You see, in one episode, future Holly goes back to the Land of Lost to help her past self. Meaning that they left at one point and Holly had to come back to save her past self. So would that mean that Enoch was a failure? Did he fail to save his future? Or did something else happen? You see, what if I told you that Enoch created 3 different timelines? And in all of them, he failed. And not only did his failure create 3 separate timelines, but they also affected not only the Land of the Lost, but our world. Okay, so for the sake of the video, the 70s version I'm going to call the Nothing Happens timeline, where essentially Enoch goes back in time to save his people and everything ends the way it ends. Like nothing changes. Well, in the 90s version is where the timeline tries to split off. For you see, this is when he tries to save his future, but ultimately, he fails. Now here's what happens. You see, in the 90s version, there's a distinct lack of things that were in the original. Like, for example, the pylons, which were built by the Altrusians. Meaning that when Enoch went back in time, maybe he went too far. And maybe stunted the growth of the Altrusians, creating the more intelligent Sleestak in the 90s version. But there's more than just a Sleestak that had changed. For instance, I think what happened was, because the pylons never got built, the Land of Lost became more unstable. You see, there are more characters from our world in that version than in the original. Meaning that maybe the Land of Lost is pulling people from time more frequently than if it, had the pylons. And what if I told you that all of this affects our world? For instance, there's a character that shows up who is from the future. Now, he says that he is from the island of San Francisco. That is because, in the future, San Francisco has such a bad earthquake that it becomes an island. That's right. It becomes an island. And how do people usually end up in the Land of Lost? When there's a massive earthquake. Meaning that this Land of Lost is very unstable without the pylons. Now, what if I told you this is not the worst timeline? I mean, how could it get worse than an unstable Land of Lost? An even more unstable Land of Lost. For you see, in the movie version, this is the timeline where Enoch didn't try to save his people. He tried to rule them. He ignored the messages of feeling empathy and controlling your anger, and decides to take over the Land of Lost for himself. Now, before I continue, I should probably point out something that might break my theory, but later on I'll prove that it doesn't. You see, in the movie, the Zarin warns that Enoch was using the Sleestak to take over. But how could that be possible if the Sleestak are a future version of the Altrusians? I figured out a solution to this. You see, Enoch didn't go by himself to the past. No, he brought the Sleestak with him, so they had an army to control. And because the Altrusians saw that the Sleestak were a big threat to not just the Land of Lost, but, other worlds like ours, they basically trapped Enoch in the Land of Lost, making it so that Enoch would need the Tachyon device in order to leave. Now, what if I told you the conflict between Enoch and his own people caused a few things to be, let's just say the boundaries between the Land of Lost and our world are very thin now. At the beginning of the movie, Holly finds a fossil that has a imprint of a lighter, which shouldn't be possible because the fossil is dated back to billions of years ago. And later on in the movie, we find out where that imprint comes from. It came from Marshall's lighter falling out of his pocket and getting stomped on by Grumpy. Not to mention, later on in the movie, they basically find this desert that's just full of everything from any point in time, there's the Golden Gate Bridge and whatnot. And what makes it worse is that the dinosaurs like to hang out in that area because humans sometimes end up in that area. That's right, the boundaries between the Land of Lost and our world are so thin that it's basically the backrooms. This is why the movie is the worst timeline. For you see, because the line between our world and Land of Lost is so thin, the Land of Lost just randomly pulls stuff from time. And the movie doesn't really elaborate on it, but I kind of feel like eventually this will become a very big issue in the future. I think a scary part about this movie is the fact that no one points out that people are just disappearing, which makes me think that in the time that the movie takes place in, which is probably 2010, all the stuff being brought to Land of Lost is at a smaller quantity, which means in the future it'll be at a higher quantity. So basically, if the Land of Lost is taking more and more, then what's going to happen to our world? Who knows? Maybe it's only a matter of time before our world gets destroyed, and we won't have to worry about that Sleestack that was going to, make a sequel that never came. But anyway, that's a theory. A pug theory! I'll keep working on the title. Until then, like the video, and comment, and subscribe, and let me know what you think. And maybe I'll make another one of these. Who knows? Until then, bye!